Okay, there he goes.
Hello.
Hello, Patrick.
Wow, your audio is pretty good.
Yeah, it's professional equipment here. Still need to check if I'm in a good frame here, because it's like split in 3 halves, right?
Yeah, that's correct.
But now we can change them, right?
Yeah, I think we can even do like this and then feature Patrick. Yeah, this
That's fine.
pretty good too.
The thirds are nice. I already got the nice frame, so feel free to mod it as you want. So hello everyone.
Okay.
Thanks for having me today.
We are still like offline. Well, we're online basically, but we didn't start the show. We want to run the intro, probably present Gabriel first, then me, and then the star, which is you.
Sounds good.
So is it rainy today?
Mm-hmm.
Is it rainy? Oh.
Do you hear it?
No.
Okay.
Is that rainy?
Yeah, it's raining, but I was not sure if you can hear it in the background. Otherwise, I need to close my window.
I can barely hear it, so it's not bothering a lot.
How long does the intro go?
I don't know. until Gabriel like looks not so pixie.
Okay. Where you're all located right now?
He's in Brazil, and I'm
you're
Spain.
in Spain, right?
So yeah, it's definitely not raining here.
Okay, so okay, so yeah, I think we can run the intro right already and get going with it, right? Okay, so I'm gonna just remove Patrick for a second. Okay, so my connection is a bit flex, so hopefully I won't be like long for some reason. Okay, so I'm gonna introduce myself.
Right.
I'm Gabriel, also known as Fake Nichols on the social media, Twitter, and I run a company here called Vienna, which is working on facilitating charging with the new Brazilian central bank payment system called Pix. And I teach some stuff. I also give some. Yeah, and let's do it.
Okay, so yeah, I'm David. I work for Ahrefs, mostly on open source library called StyledPPX. It's mostly bringing styled components into Reason and ReScript and OCaml. And half time I'm doing that, half time I'm doing product, mostly front end. And aside from that, I'm running the show, and that's basically it. So the intro of the show is going to be pretty fast, but it's like welcome everybody to emelletv, where we talk about OCaml, ReScript, and Reason communities. We ask silly questions, and we bring like people who are stars in the community, or they contribute a lot of their free time or maybe paid time into the tools, into the language that we all love and use, or we all hate and use. So welcome everybody to a new week where we introduce Patrick. So if you bring him into the show.
All right, so let's add Patrick again. Okay.
So yeah. So
hi there. So
hello everyone.
Who is?
Hello. So who are you, Patrick?
What is the question? Who I am? Who am I?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. So let me introduce myself. My name is Patrick Ecker. Some people know me with my GitHub handle, which is Ryppy. It's a Finnish short name. I'm currently working for a company called Rohea. It's a Finnish company working on their own sales enablement platform. And I'm also board member of the ReScript Association, which is mostly dedicated to like support and develop parts of the ReScript programming language, and basically also the ecosystem. And I'm also part of the core team of the ReScript programming language, helping out with the documentation platform, and sometimes also some development tools and libraries and such. So yeah, that's what I'm doing.
Amazing. Now, if you have seen the previous shows, we used to have like a non-branded stream. So now we are like professionals or getting there. And so now we are properly designed now. So
yeah, it looks great.
Yeah. So before we get into the topic of ReScript, or maybe like more your like professional life, let's start a little bit with the chit chat. So the first question would be like, how do you explain to your relatives what you do?
Oh, that's a good one. So usually what I say is that I'm working on websites most of the time, because this is something people can relate to. And sometimes I'm also saying that I'm working on a programming language, which is also sometimes a very interesting conversation starter.
Right.
Oftentimes there are more people who have been programming some websites, so sometimes they can even relate and then ask a few more questions about it. Yeah, and also telling them that I'm working on products in general. So if there's like apps or something, people can relate to apps. So oftentimes I say it's just web apps, and
right.
Yeah, this is something they understand.
Right. Perfect. So, but when you are working like on Sunday, like imagine that you're working on Sunday, and then someone says, "Hey, Patrick, we're going to have lunch. Are you coming?" And you say, "No, I'm working on open source." And then, do they understand that your time is not paid, and open source is not like your big boss? So how you explain the free time part of our life kind of thing?
So I guess the only person I'm not allowed to just tell them that I'm working during my spare time is my wife. So,
Okay.
but she does understand what I'm working on. So for her, it's like, okay, if he's like working on something important, it's fine. And for most of my friends, they are actually from the tech point of view, so they understand what open source is, and they're
Right.
like also doing open source. So most of my friends, and I guess I would never mention it to anyone else who is like not a techie, because they have no idea what this is.
Right. So how many of your friends are they doing ReScript these days?
Well, most of them are aware of it because of me, and some of them have been like, many friends of mine are in the same like meetup communities in Vienna. So, for instance, we have the React Vienna meetup group, which is a very, very nice group of people, and most of them have helped us out with a ReasonConf back then. So they know, and they have tried it back then when it was still like Reason and Buckoscript.
Right.
And they tried it, but they kind of they still have like a day job, and they're still working in React, or even working in plain JavaScript still. So for them, it's not that important to investigate any further, but sometimes to pick it up and check what improvements have been made. And so far the feedback was pretty good from the people who have been like diving into the language in, I don't know, 2018 last time, or 2017, and they're like, okay,
Right.
now let's revisit the whole thing and the whole experience. And I've got so much good feedback about it, because they now understand how this works, and how do you set it up, and how do you do React with it. So
Right. So before ReScript, Reason, or Reason Association, what were you doing?
so I'm I told you that I'm working at Rohe, but I'm also a contractor, and I have been a contractor for quite a while now. The last time when I was employed was like 4 or 5 years ago, like 2016. Before I went self-employed. And what I've been doing was a lot of contracting work in React projects and React Native projects. Sometimes, like my last client was like even a top 500 Fortune company in Silicon Valley. And we have been doing kind of interesting stuff with Preact and Drupal. So that was a kind of cool experience. So I have seen a lot of code bases in my time. And I learned to hate Redux in that time, especially, but also kind of like it because there is a lot of interesting technical challenges in like many different contexts and companies. So I learned a lot and saw a lot of things. While I was doing this, I was also kind of involved in open source with the flow type ecosystem. So I used to work on the flow typed project where like the CLI tool where you can pull down flow definitions and manage them. And I've been also like maintaining a few arbitrary bindings, for instance, the Redux Saga I created the Redux Saga flow type definitions, which have been pretty insane.
Yeah, that doesn't sound like funny.
Yeah, I mean, back then it was amazing because we didn't have like in that time TypeScript wasn't that good, and Flow was pretty well integrated in the React Native ecosystem. So I kind of enjoyed this work until I didn't enjoy it anymore.
Right.
And then Reason came up and everything, and then I kind of switched the topics and tried to invest more time into this, right? Because I thought it was a cool idea.
Did a lot of people from the Flow community move to Reason at that time, or that wave didn't happen?
I'm not sure, to be honest. I think that Flow users were more prone for trying out Reason back then and BuckleScript, but I cannot really tell in numbers. Probably some people got disappointed by Flow and they didn't want to switch over to TypeScript, and then they tried out alternatives. Some have been like dabbling into more functional languages like Elm, or tried out PureScript or whatever, and then maybe stumbled upon Reason or something. So I can imagine that there was a funnel for Flow developers who have been involved in the React ecosystem and then streaming into the BuckleScript ecosystem. Might be.
Right, perfect. So when was your first like contribution into the BuckleScript or Reason?
So that's a good question. I think I didn't do much contributions. The only contributions I did, like on a technical side, the most contributions I did were mostly about evangelizing the technology and trying it out and making it more popular on conferences and talking about it, but also organizing like ReasonConf in 2018. This was like the first ReasonConf. It was in summer 2018. And then we had another one in 2019. And I guess my big ambition for this project was to kind of create a branch of this project where the community can hook in. And because the project was very dependent on Facebook infrastructure, it was dependent on employees of Facebook. And for me, it was kind of important to make it a little bit more independent from this organization and have like at least one one foot on the community. So they're kind of like having their own legal entity and can fund themselves and stuff like that, like this major foundation of like building professional software.
Right.
And this is where we started creating the which is now called the ReScript Association, but back then it was called the Reason Association, which we needed to organize conferences, because if you have like a conference, you have, I don't know, like a budget or a total budget of 50 to 100,000 euros. and you don't want to be eligible for that as a person. You probably want to have an organization which is responsible for that money. That's why we created this organization, and because it's also a little bit more, professional. If you have like an independent organization, it's like a nonprofit, it's a declared nonprofit organization, and there's like a legal infrastructure behind it. There's statutes and stuff like that. This is something companies need, because they cannot just like, they can collaborate with individuals, but it's usually more of a hassle. And now we're able to offer like a donation platform and stuff like that. So that was very important for me, but probably not so important for other people.
Right.
But yeah, it's existing now for 3 years. So it turned out to be a good idea for, I think, because for the future, it will be very important to have this kind of infrastructure.
Right. Makes sense. So before arriving to the kind of like rebranding, how was like the moment where we said, oh, this year we're not going to have a conference, and then COVID happened? So why on 2020 you didn't like want it, or what was the reason to not have a conference?
So we had a conference location planned. We already reserved it for 2020. But since there were so many uncertainties on where the platform is moving, what are the goals, what are the decision makers doing, I got a little bit scared on making a commitment on another conference, which might go into a completely wrong direction. So after talking to my like co-organizers, we decided that it might probably be better to postpone it a little bit for a year or something. And then COVID happened, and then we were like super grateful that we didn't do it, because this would have ruined us.
Yeah. So could you try to summarize what were the challenges that the community, or maybe the leaders were facing?
So the biggest problem for me was that the project never was really 100% transparent. It was a quite huge task for me to, get the trust and get the understanding of what's going on in the project itself, because there's a lot of, like individual motivations, and then there's like certain information that shouldn't be like exposed right away without any context. So it took quite a while until I fully understood what's the problem in managing this kind of project. And unfortunately, I realized it a little bit too late. In my opinion, it was already too late when ReasonConf 2019 happened, because I was pretty convinced that this whole idea of native and JavaScript compilation, that this is like a compelling story for web developers, that this might sell really well and this might solve a lot of problems the web community has. But this meant that I had to kind of connect two communities together, like the OCaml community and the Reason community, or the JavaScript community in that regard. Because Reason was always BuckleScript for me. That's something I was like, okay, yeah, BuckleScript and Reason are one thing, but for other people which are also team members or another team, because the project was managed by two teams, kind of had a different vision of it, and we never really clearly talked about it. And this was a huge problem, because now you had an organizer who is organizing a conference for two communities and trying to put them together, because the OCaml community tends to have more funding, which is also important if you talk about open source. And the leadership actually didn't agree with that. So they were like, no, this whole idea of bringing them together is a really, really bad idea, because they are not compatible in many ways. And this caused a lot of churn, and some people burned out on that. And it was probably a mistake, but on the other hand, it was a very important learning to understand that maybe it's better to focus on one story and make it really good, and try to blend out the other things that maybe are not that important.
Right.
And also figure out what's the goal. What is the goal and what is like the mission for all the people involved.
Right. So then the rebranding or the born of ReScript happened. So that was like, I think, a story that we all more or less know. How is it going? Because last August was like 1 year. Did it achieve like some expectations? Do you have some numbers? How's your perspective on the first year?
So I'm biased, because if we would do this, if we would pull off this rebranding and then it didn't pay off at all, that would be devastating. I think it was kind of successful. There are still a few things I would have liked to improve a little bit sooner, but yeah, it's just the way, or the way it was communicated was not ideal. But as I said, the project in the background, what's happening in the background was way more complex than a lot of people will probably believe. It was even like, for me, it was disturbingly complex to understand what's going on. But I mean, I'm working with ReScript professionally in my daily work, and I've been using Reason for quite a while as well. So I have a very good subjective comparison between both languages.
Right.
And for me, ReScript kind of is the language I always wanted Reason to be.
Okay.
Like I'm completely convinced of the technology. I'm convinced of the implementation of how it's being done. And I'm also convinced on the directions of the syntax, like the decisions that were made. I think they are really, really good. And there are still a few things I would like to improve, but would basically change the language in another layer, like when we talk about, I don't know, anchoring by default.
Yep.
That would be like, if this would go into this language, it would just improve it by 200% for me personally, because I'm doing a lot of React development, web development. I don't really care about this, functional patterns. I just want to write JavaScript in some regard, and it does it really, really well. And a few things that I didn't like was, for instance, that it took so long. But this has nothing to do with the syntax itself, but more like about the infrastructure. For instance, that we still didn't get the branding completely consistent. bsconfig is still a thing. bs.js is still a thing.
Right.
And I really want to make this, go away in a way that it's also compatible or backwards compatible.
Right.
And for that, we need more people working on the compiler. And I think one goal of my personal goal actually is for next year that we actually find a way to scale up on the compiler infrastructure, that more people contribute to that and make it easier for people to actually modify this stuff, because it's so important to raise the buzz factor in that regard.
Right.
Yeah. But all in all, I think I'm convinced that this is the right direction, and the change has been a huge improvement. If you check out we didn't do any stat tracking. No, we don't have any stats from the Reason community, but we have like a few stats from the Reason forums back then, but nobody uses the forum because everyone is convinced that a chat is better than a forum.
Right.
But for the ReScript community, we have website traffic. And the website traffic is actually quite interesting. If you go to the rescriptlang.org repository, you can find a link to the simple analytics. And there is some very interesting chart if you check it out. It's making some tick checks.
Okay.
You can really see like spikes, and then you have like a spike down below. And this is actually, if you check the dates or the days, it's always like Monday to Friday, it goes up. on Saturday, Sunday goes down. And then it goes up and it goes down. This is a very good sign for me that more people are using that in production. And that's the most important thing for me. I don't care if people check it out on the weekend. I care mostly about people working with it in their daily work.
That's quite interesting.
Yeah, and also I also like the stats on the forum because it really shows that there are people caring about this stuff and visiting the forum over and over again, and there's a good retention on users and discussions. And yeah, that's something. It's a really good progress for me to have this persistent knowledge on the forum.
Yeah, makes sense.
It's a lot of value.
Yeah. One question that is more related with the language itself. So, you mentioned a couple of times that you prefer like the user that is more like working day to day into the language. And since ReScript has this nature of being like a good FP language, and most FP languages are like bring into life by people who are really passionate about. So most people that are a little bit driven by emotions rather than mission of day-to-day job. How do you see that coming? Where I saw a lot of people from the forum like asking, how do I do the monad IO, or how do tasks, or how do blah blah blah? Where you have like two kind of people in the same community, but you as a person or representative of the recent team or ReScript team, you prefer the workforce kind of thing.
Well, I mean, I have nothing against like intellectual challenges and doing some what we call code golfing. Okay, you have like certain concepts and you try to convert it to ReScript and get a learning from that. But then there are people who are completely taking this to the next level where you say, okay, this is just distracting everyone else from getting stuff done. Instead of, wrangling a bunch of first class modules, why don't you just make one escape hatch? Just use one identity function, or I don't know, use something simpler, pass a function or something. There's I think a lot of people know our stance on this, and especially with previous community leaders, or how to say,
right? Yeah, past visions.
You know what I mean. Shepherds of the language who tried to make people understand what's important, but of course, everyone has their own motivation learning a new language. So I will not go ahead and shut down any discussion which is about implementing monads.
Right.
But people should also understand that the language is going into a certain direction, and maybe it's not completely apparent in which direction it goes. But if there's, I don't know, if you try to bend the language in one way or another, which is not what we are not trying to design it for, why do you force it in and try to convince people to use that method? For instance, when we say, okay, please don't write a PPX for every single thing you need. Please don't do that unless you know what you're doing. And then there are people like shoehorning it into every project and then into every library. And then you're like, oh God, how are we going to maintain this? And as a core team, because if we make a breaking change, we need to make sure that all these dependencies are maintained. We have seen quite a few things, quite a few bad ideas, which have been rolled out in the community. They got traction, and then the maintainer of this tool just dropped out because this is open source, right? And I don't want to blame the maintainer, but sometimes it's like, why didn't you take our advice and don't talk about it like this, and maybe have a like a warning on top that this is not probably the most maintainable way. So, but it's also a matter of having a more open communication from the team side. That's something I was working on most of the time. I try to express goals, I try to express a roadmap, or try to get people to agree on a roadmap so people understand, okay, this is like the direction this is going. Or if there is a certain discussions about what the language is trying to implement and then bring this discussion out. This is something we didn't do in the past, but it's opening up more and more.
Right.
Anyways, I'm not sure if I answered the question in that sense,
yeah,
but I see that there are multiple groups of people. Some are there just to learn a new language. Some are there to really get productive with it. And we actually care about these people who want to ship a product and want to integrate it in their existing TypeScript code bases or JavaScript code base. These are like our core audience or target group. But of course, we accept everyone. We welcome everyone who wants to tinker with it.
Right, that makes sense. So yeah, Marcos asks a very good question, which is like how people's gonna do meta programming basically. But I want to like give a little bit of like around the question where like now if you want to write a PPX, which is discouraged, but there are some use cases that are still like no brainer to not use a PPX, which for me is still like ReScript is really cool. But if you want to do those kind of tools or those kind of plugins, add-ons, whatever you want to call it, macros, you still need to understand OCaml. You still need to go deeper into the kind of like not the drama, but on the tech side, on the what's PPX lib, what's the parse tree. So many layers of things that it's not your language anymore. So like stories from the past where like languages are not built with the language that is produced has been like not super amazing stories. So yeah, what's your vision for like maybe like long term on that?
Yeah, we have been discussing this a lot, what we should do about it. There was first of all, there's one way. We say please don't use PPXs, but those people who know how they work and what problems they can introduce, or who are aware of the problems, they will use it anyways because they know their way around it. But we don't want to necessarily push every newcomer into this tech.
Right.
So if there's people who are using GraphQL PPX, they have their use cases. Okay, that's fine. They should just use it because I know that YAP, for instance, is behind that because this has been around for years now. Mm-hmm. That's something I have control over, kind of. And I can talk to YAP and he can talk to me. So that's easier. But there are some other PPXs that are completely random where I'm not even sure why they exist. And then some people maybe pick them up and they're like, oh, this is how you do it. And then they also do it. And it's like this. There's like the missing piece, as you said. You need to understand OCaml. And then there is like this previous mix of Reason community and OCaml community, or BuckleScript and OCaml, and they try to make this as one thing. So they added a lot of abstractions in between. So it's not only ASD transformations, but it's also like introducing extra tools to make the ASDs compatible between different OCaml versions. That's a problem. And what we need to do to allow like curated metaprogramming is first add some constraints. And one constraint was that libraries should never be able to use PPXs. So if I'm using a certain library, it should not be able to use a PPX or multiple PPXs inside the library. So what it should do is like be very lean, have no dependencies if possible. And the PPXs should be reserved for the application space. So if you have like an application, you should be responsible for building your own PPXs. That's one requirement. If they are pre-compiled, like some PPXs are, or if you compile it yourself on a company level, you have like a company and you say to everyone, here's our PPX repository, here you can compile it, and then you link it up. That's fine. That's fine because you're in control. We don't want anyone to be, deserted because we upgraded to a new AST and then the dependencies don't work anymore. And then you have like dependency hell where some libraries depend on an old PPX and this is not compatible with M1 and stuff like that. So there's a lot of like crazy things going on then. And another thing we need to rename, like for me personally, I hate the word PPX because for me it's a syntax extension, right? there's two things you can do. You can have a syntax extension, or you can have just something like the React Intel extractor, which is not really a PPX. I mean, it's running over the AST and extracting some information, but it's not transforming the AST, right? So there's like two things, two use cases, how you can use them. And we need to define that this is like a syntax extension, and a syntax extension can do this. And then we need like a well-documented, how do I develop a syntax extension section?
Right.
And this would involve, okay, first requirement, you need to learn OCaml. You need to understand how OPAM works. You need to use our, or actually there's a third part I will go in later on, but you need to have like certain compiler libs from the ReScript part, which has the AST and all the stuff. So a mini documentation for just this one specific thing. People should not learn the whole OCaml ecosystem because it doesn't make any sense for them. But they should be able to zoom around a PPX and, like edit it really quickly and be very lean with the dependencies so they don't need to recompile like for 20 minutes all the time.
Right.
So what I think, like Bob, the person who is responsible for the compiler and working on the type check and everything, he wanted to have this, curated thing where we can say, okay, this is our syntax extension. We work on the ReScript AST, so to say, even though it's the OCaml AST 4.6 something, but it's a very specific version, and you're not supposed to use PPX lib and stuff like that. Just a very, very simple thing which doesn't need 15 transformations to, get to the point. That's the one requirement we had, and this will just take forever to
absolutely
to define and express, and then have the politics around it, because a lot of people will be upset that they cannot like reuse it in OCaml and in ReScript. But I also talked to Jaap about it, so I wanted to have the GraphQL PPX a little bit independent from, from the OCaml usage side and the ReScript usage side. It would be nice if the core would be like one thing, because the core is the most important part, and then the front end on which platform you compile it to, this could be like two separate things. And maybe even leave out the PPX lib stuff, something that's adding a lot of complexity, a lot of, executable size, a lot of extra loops it has to do, and just base it off our AST, for instance, to make it a little bit more leaner. So, and he was actually keen on the idea, but it's of course it's work, and we'll need to see if this actually.
Right. But that's definitely not a priority, right?
No, it's not really a priority. So the GraphQL PPX will work as always, but for other PPX, I don't even have any recommendations how to do this, because for me, metaprogramming should actually happen on the Node.js runtime. Like if I have, I don't know, one person was asking for generating types from a JSON schema, and I would just base it off a Node.js script. Write a ReScript file that compiles into, JavaScript. It takes a JSON schema and uses template strings to print out the types, for instance.
Right. Yeah. I mean,
would be portable, and people would be able to edit it, because it's like JavaScript as a runtime, and you don't need the whole compile tool chain and different processors.
Right. It's definitely a solution. Oh, yeah. All the babies come to the show. Right. It's definitely a solution for sure. Right. So I think you answered that question many times, but I want to hear like from the author. So why is there's no like a definitely typed in ReScript? In TypeScript at the beginning, it was very easy to add types separately from the repos, so people who were like more experienced could review the pull request, blah 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 blah. And you would not like fight with the maintainer of the tool to fight against Flow or TypeScript. So they create like definitely type. You said many times that that's not the case for for BackScript. So, and I think the reasons were like, that doesn't work this way with this language. So could you try to make it a little bit like why?
So for me, so first of all, this topic, there were a few people tackling this problem. And also early on in the Reason community where people were like trying to make this work, and they had some prototypes that looked very promising. Because of course, it's always nice if you can take a best case scenario and then convert it over to Reason types, and that's fine. But the TypeScript system, the TypeScript type system is very complex. And as soon as you hit generics, as soon as you hit, like type refinements and stuff like that, or like weird magic types, or mixed or stuff like that, it's getting really complex really quick. And then you start like introducing a lot of abstract types you need to pass around. I mean, there's one solution in the JSFO camel space where they were really convinced that they have like the perfect solution for generating these types. But I inspected the output and I was like, no way I'm going to use that, because the output was, of course, like very verbose. There's a lot of like extra modules and a lot of extra types and a lot of conversion functions and stuff like that. And it really depends on, if you're using ReScript, it really depends on how you want to approach a problem. Sometimes for me, I want to be as close to the JavaScript equivalent as possible. So if I write a binding, I try to have zero cost, like on the runtime side, that there is not an extra runtime function call or whatever. Try to stay very clean. And sometimes I take escape hatches just to be able to do that. I don't know, use an identity function or stuff like that.
Right.
If you have union types, for instance, union types are not expressible in ReScript, so you need to either convert them or do some trickery. So if you do this like extra layer, then there is multiple ways to do things, and everyone has a different opinion on that. So I don't think that you just have like one way to convert it and then everyone uses that and is happy. And and I also saw it from the flow typed project that it's like having this monster repo like definitely typed and then manage that in a small community where people just leave without any notice. It's so hard to maintain. And I always recommend, if you're having dependencies, I usually recommend vendor them, because most of the dependencies are like one file split up on 20 files. Like for instance, I don't know, you have the date times the date offense node module, and you want to write bindings for that. And then people go ahead and write like 100 different module files, even though it has only one binding in there. So why don't you just put it in one module file and have all the functions in there? Because we have like 1,000-line files and it doesn't matter. It's not like JavaScript where it figures out at 500 lines of code. And I would just copy them into my project and keep them forever. It's kind of like the Go approach where you vendor all your dependencies. But yeah, I mean, it's also like a subjective view on the topic. But yeah, there are technical reasons for definitely typed not existing in ReScript.
Okay.
The other way around though is more interesting, because we can go with gentype. It's actually way more convenient to generate TypeScript types. This is something because the stronger type system can always be converted into a looser type system, although the other way around is harder.
Definitely, because still, like for people who comes from JavaScript, TypeScript, writing bindings, I would assume that this is still one of the most barriers for people. So yeah, I see like any solution that, like any help, any kind of like oiling into that problem would make, like, of course, like much easier to start, even though it's a bad start maybe, or like a not so recommended start. Any help would be very beneficial for the community.
Yeah, I mean, Maxime tried his best to make it easier to write bindings, if you remember the import proposal. that was a very, very good proposal in my opinion, because it really nailed the syntax. It was so nice. Like you write import, write fn, write file system or whatever, and then from something something. It replicated the thing really well, but I understand why it didn't make it. But and also when I think about a few years ago when people were supposed to write bindings, it was really way worse. I feel like newcomers come in and they kind of get the external stuff more than a few years ago.
Okay. So if you are a developer, if you are someone who arrived passionately on ReScript, and you maybe you try to sell it to your boss, maybe you succeed, maybe you not, maybe to your team, what he can do for the language? What's the scope where like are more people needed in terms of like maybe more content, maybe more solutions, maybe like a big company with a big name with a logo in front? So what's the where people can help basically?
I think that case studies are really important, and I always wanted to tackle that in one way or another. I would be really keen if there are companies out there using the technology and having like a good success story for them, where ReScript kind of shined. I would really like to have certain articles about it, like write articles with them, have some interviews, write down some metrics, some numbers if they have some, and publish that on the blog and on the website as well. That would be one way to at least have, more reasons for the business side, because of course CTOs and leaders, they want to have certainty that a technology is still there in a few years and has been established in bigger companies as well. And also I think what also is important, and I think Next is a really good example for streamlining certain development. We need some, and I try to do this with my ReScript Next template. I mean, it's not fancy, but it kind of helps funneling people into the platform where they're like, okay, I just want to start a next project. How do I do this? And just give them like a full working example and a few tutorials on how to do certain things.
Right.
And I think a lot of people have been doing a great job writing blog posts about the technology and about writing externals, doing simple things. Really appreciate these posts. And of course, there are a lot of topics still not covered on the documentation itself. And I try to create a roadmap for that. Or a milestone on the issue tracker. So if you check that out, there's a lot of easy pickups, or for more experienced users, there's also more advanced stuff. For instance, how do we document first-class modules or something?
Right.
These things should be documented at some point. So this is something where people could help contribute, for instance. Yeah,
perfect. So what are the problems that the ReScript team is now solving? Now, Bob had the other day the office hours. He started like explaining what's coming from the version 10. So what problems are raised from the 10 or maybe the 11 that you see them worth fixing?
I didn't attend to the last office hours. I'm not sure what Bob said. If he was going into the details of the roadmap as we have it on the website. There's a few things. The Unicode support is one thing, that the ReScript syntax itself is now Unicode compatible, so you can use Unicode characters in normal strings or in template strings, doesn't matter. There were a few. I actually need to look it up right now real quick, because there are a few things that are on the roadmap, and then there's a few things that are kind of loosely on the roadmap. Let me check. Yeah, there are a few things. So for me, it was very important to get this documentation story right. So what I've been working on was generating the docs from doc headers. But right now we're still using this @ocaml.doc decorator, which should be gone in the future. So we wanted to work on the like docstring syntax support, so you can use /** to get this, like have this nicer experience. And we also wanted to define some very simple doc header syntax, which is basically Markdown. And we didn't want to go with GSDoc or whatever. We want to keep it as simple as possible. Yeah, and then there were a few things that were actually only on the compiler level. For me, the V10 should be a very, very stable release. So, and also the code should be in a better place. So the compiler should have some bigger refactorings in there, which contain restructuring of the project, maybe introducing Dune to manage the code a little bit easier so people can contribute more easily, and have a better understanding of the code altogether. So we can, I don't know, I need to work on the standard lib a lot in the future. So I also need to, change the standard lib ML files to ReScript files. And then we want to have like updated doc headers that reflect the current state of our API docs.
Right,
and
that's perfect.
And then we can generate the actual documentation for the website as well. And this requires us to make the code base a little bit easier to maintain for at least non-Bob contributors.
Right. So yeah, that I wanted to ask that because Javascript has been, or ReScript compiler has been maintained for like almost one person. We can see the buzz factor pretty big on ReScript, but yeah, there are a few people who can understand and maintain the compiler as well. But my question was like, which persons would you expect from contributing into ReScript? Do you see someone from OCaml coming to the language? Do you see new people coming along? You see like people from Facebook that used to work on the flow. So who do you expect to contribute?
Well, I guess the most fitting description would be people that are aligned with the mission of the language, because it's probably not. I mean, of course, the compiler itself, the type checker, the pattern match engine is really complex, and that's something that's not going to be easy to replace or get a better buzz factor in. But the rest of the compiler infrastructure is not that complicated. It's mostly about cleaning it up and explaining it better and documenting it. Because I've been zipping around the code base for quite a few years now. I've been building the online playground you use daily on the ReScript Lang website, which is essentially also part of the compiler repo. And I've never had a problem like understanding what's going on or finding my way through the code. It's just a matter of getting some guidance from more experienced people. And we have a lot of experienced people. We have Bob, we have Cristiano. I can help in certain aspects. Cheng also helps a lot. And Maxime as well with the syntax, of course. Maxime is also very keen on reviewing stuff and accepting PRs if you're keen on working on a printer and parser. So it's just a matter of being a good fit on a personal level, where you say, okay, you're aligned with the goals. You don't want to you align with the technical limitations, because for instance, Bob is very, very strict with performance. And if you're introducing a lot of things that are restructuring a lot of code or making code less performant, he will not accept it.
Right.
And that's something people need to understand. But other than that, it's on the also the documentation itself or something. I'm usually very down to earth with changes, unless you rewrite the whole code in certain ways. I don't think it's such a big problem though.
Right. So one of the questions that you might like need to answer a lot of times would be like how you convince a JavaScript developer to stop writing JavaScript. Like the question would be, you are a person that you don't understand types. You've never seen a type in your life. You know that some people do types in C. Maybe you pass through college or something, but then you are very used to JavaScript, right? And when you think about types, you think about objects, and that's your world of knowledge, and which is totally fine. Like I think everybody can be on that area, but how do you convince to stop writing JavaScript?
That's a hard one. I think you will never convince a JavaScript developer to stop writing JavaScript, because I think the JavaScript itself as a syntax is just one thing, but the JavaScript ecosystem is really productive. So I think the first step would be that, okay, they don't have to leave the JavaScript ecosystem. That's one thing. And then you need to have some really, really compelling use cases where you say, okay, this is easier to maintain, or this is easier to handle certain scenarios. For instance, if you talk about a React developer who is like introducing Redux everywhere and then connecting the data, and then suddenly the app re-renders on really weird conditions, and then you're like, okay, why don't you pass down the props from top down? And they're like, yeah, well, because it's tedious and it's error prone. It's like, okay, why don't you use I don't know, like this language or this tool to mitigate this problem? It should show them that there is certain value of using certain tech, of course. Or there are certain scenarios where you have like a company with a huge code base and they're using, I don't know, 15 different tools to maintain their code base. Maybe they have ESLint in there, maybe they have, I don't know, FlowTab in there even, and stuff like that. And the CI takes like 20 minutes to run through 1,000 files.
Right.
And this is also something where you're like, okay, let's reduce the complexity to one tool.
Right.
And have it like consistently fast. Like the performance aspect is very important apparently, because otherwise there wouldn't be people like rewriting Rome in Rust or rewriting Webpack in Rust or whatever, or in Go.
Right.
People understand the performance aspects now, and I think it's a very good hook to sell the technology.
Right. That's like very good, like sharp arguments. But how you would convince a person saying like, oh, but I can access any property of any object via function and call it straight. How do I do that in ReScript? Like how you answer the tough questions, the questions that they need to read the book to understand why it's not possible in ReScript. This book is probably not in ReScript neither. So how you explain like statically that static is a better language than dynamic, or that it's not a better language, but it's more like it would promise it has a promise into maintainability later, right?
Yeah, I think this is. I never did that, to be honest. So I usually had cases where I convinced TypeScript developers to maybe move over, or people with very, very, very complex code for no apparent reason to move over a simpler architecture. But then it's like kind of sold as a framework as well, because it's like integrated with React and it's part of the language and stuff like that. But if you have like a really down-to-earth plain JavaScript developer without any experience in other languages and without any knowledge of static type systems, I'm not even sure if it's a good idea to like try to convince them, because it might feel intrusive to them to, he's like in his ivory tower, I just want to write my JavaScript. And I think it's fine, they can coexist.
Right.
Because I think our target group is more like, okay, you have like Flow users, you have TypeScript users. They are not happy with the performance of their tools. They don't like the caches. They don't like, I don't know, they don't like the way how Redux has type actions, and variants are way nicer in that regard. And we have to reduce their pattern, and we have this kind of stuff. So it's a little easier to find certain aspects or optional properties or I don't know. I think that prop trilling in ReScript is just such a cool feature, but a lot of people are not aware when they didn't use it. Yeah.
So I see that the latest proposal for ReScript has been more like TypeScripty, right? Let's get a little bit nasty here, because all the syntax from ReScript, it looks more like TypeScript. And even the proposal that the imports or the externals try to get better are more like looking like TypeScript. Is that on purpose? Is that accidental? Or do you all guys like love TypeScript during the nighttime?
Well, I think ReScript looks more like Swift,
right?
In some regard, and I think ReScript also got a lot of inspiration from Swift. Even though it doesn't look like it. But if you check out newer languages, they all kind of look the same. And import, I mean, for instance, the import syntax was a no-brainer for me, because how many times have you been writing import something from something? Like in different languages and also in JavaScript, you have been writing this 1,000 times. You will never forget the order of where to put the module name and the module file path. So I think it's not about like looking like TypeScript, but more like how would I want the language to behave? And I think this would be a nice way to do it. But for instance, the currying stuff, we want the currying to switch around. That would be more like TypeScript, right? But it has a practical purpose, because how many times have you been messed up with runtime overhead because you wanted to have a callback, just a simple callback, and you don't want to uncurry it because uncurrying is so annoying. And then it shows up as a curry call in the output, making it unreadable. And I just cannot find any use cases for currying in my daily work to justify this to be the default, to have currying by default. Right. And that's why, and also like the others, like Maxime and Cheng, all of them, and even Bob, he was also like convinced that would be better. And it's such a scary change for many people that they don't think it would be good, but I'm so convinced.
Yeah,
at some point you need to trust someone to make the right calls on this, and
I've come to agree to like in day-to-day usage. I see why they are doing this, why they are talking about it now. I after letting it sinking in my head, it's understandable. Now I'm convinced.
Yeah. Or when we talk about certain API designs, because I have been heavily defending my ReScript promise API against the original reason promise thing, because I was so convinced that reason promise is the right way. And Cheng was even super convinced that it was the right way when they initiated the project, because he was kind of part of initiating it. So I was like, okay, why is this not taking off? And then I've been spending like a week just working with promises all the time in ReScript, and thinking about, okay, this is extremely wrong. Like the way how you handle like two types of promises. One is like save, and the other one is like unsafe, and you need to check and then convert it and stuff like that. This is going like in a similar direction as the very old React APIs, when you remember the record-based reason React.
Right.
It was cool, and it was an extra layer, and it made interop so hard. And I know a lot of people don't like the purists. They're like, no, I don't want to do interop, but you need interop. It's such an important feature. Definitely. And that's why I was super defensive on not adding any fluff, not adding anything that's not part of the public API in JavaScript. And this stuff is important. But it's also a lot of opinions. I cannot really justify it just by saying I think it's a good idea. That's my justification, and just my experience of using the language. And I felt it, and then talked to Cristiano about it, and he's like criticizing also a lot of parts of it. So I trust the people making, like, reviewing this, that this is the right way.
Right. Definitely. So maybe last question. We're running maybe a little late on time, but how has been like running the community, like doing the forum, the decisions that not have a chat or have a chat or whatever, and writing the blog post and having the announcements of the running, like all this experience seems very like from the outside, very corporate-y and very like stressful. How has been like being you, the person that try to calm down every opinion, or even like try to be the face of like a team that vocally are very different from each other?
Yeah, it was quite an interesting experience. I would not try to repeat it. That's something you probably don't want to do this that way, how we did it, because it was not okay the way we did it. We had to pull the handbrake basically. But on the other hand, we're still alive, so that's a good sign.
Right.
I think things would have been easier if the internal stuff would be easier and would allow us to communicate more openly, but we couldn't. So that's why it was kind of a weird move where we said, okay, there's a new syntax now, and now we call it ReScript. And it was not clear to a very late point in time if we are still going with the reason name, because we were not sure if like certain decision makers decide that reason is now Buckerscript and we merged them together and then managed by one team. And in the end, it didn't work out. And then we had to basically invent a new name.
Right.
That's why it was so weird. And then I tried really my best to be as politically correct as possible and try to reach out to people who are upset. We tried to have conversations with a lot of people. Those people who tend to use it in production were quite happy. But there are also a lot of people with very strong opinions, like extremely strong. They had such an emotional reaction to it, which is okay, but they didn't stop. They just didn't stop. At some point, we really had to like just ignore them because there was no point discussing with them anymore. This was a learning to understand how to interact with certain individuals. Of course, we treated some people more unfair, people who have been contributing a lot to the community. And then we kind of pulled the rug underneath and said, no, this is not how you do it. I have to apologize for that. And I feel like this should have been handled better. But on the other hand, I'm also happy that the strictness helped pushing the community in one direction so that, you know, everyone knew, okay, this was the position of the team, even though it was a weirdly expressed position, but we know this is what they want. And then there were a few people either leaving the community, which is fine, or going to the other direction, other community. And then there were people who kind of got over it and then moved along with us, which I'm really happy. And you guys are also part of that, I believe, because you're also been dealing a lot with us,
yes.
with our bullshit. But and another thing which I find interesting is that the newcomers are completely untouched. They have no idea what was going on back then in the past few years. So for me personally, I think the community is developing really in a really healthy way. It's not exponentially like rising in numbers, but we have very high quality newcomers in there. And I have a few newcomers which I'm really proud of. Kevin has been doing a lot of work on the documentation. Like he was basically single-handedly writing the syntax widget content. So really huge shout out to him. And also a few other people who are like randomly committing PRs without even knowing like how this works and still trying. So yeah, I think it's a great community, and I think it will grow in the future. Not as fast as I wished, but we'll see.
Right. How fast do you want it to grow? Do you want to be the Rust on the front end, or? Would you like to compete with TypeScript? That's kind of like the end goal.
No, because if we try to compete with TypeScript, we would also need to move in with every feature TypeScript adds, and we're basically doing the opposite. We are trying to remove features as much as possible, and we try to be a language for a certain kind of team and person. So I'm not entirely sure how much we should grow in some way or another. But I don't want to like explode and then be like in every newspaper.
Right.
Because it's kind of like also a secret weapon, in my opinion. Like the company I'm working for, we're really happy with this. Like the comparison, because we integrated in an existing Flow type code base, and the difference working in Flow, because we also have a lot of legacy code. We still need to write code in that. The difference working in the Flow code base and the ReScript code base is night and day. It's like performance goes up, like development performance is way better. And it's much more reliable to make changes. Like for our product, it's perfect. And I hope that other people find this specific use case for it and then be happy with it.
Right.
Yeah, cool. I'm pretty happy with ReScript currently at my company. So we don't think anything else of writing code, anything else. It's just too good for like there is no other option. Like it's ReScript. So congrats for making it such a great tool for the usage. The new site also is pretty fantastic. I can point to any beginners to go there and check the content, read the documentation, because it's so good. Like I don't need to do anything else. So congrats.
Yeah, thank you for pushing also content, because you have been writing a lot of learning materials as well. So
yeah,
it's one hand washes another, I guess.
Thank you.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for your efforts, Patrick. I think even the playground, it's very like useful every day, every day. So just that and just the documentation is, yeah, definitely. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah. Okay. I think we are running late on the time, right? So, do you want to wrap it up or anything else to say? No, fine.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So that was it. It was pretty good show. Like I love to have Patrick here. He's such a nice guy, and I hope everyone else enjoyed it too. The video will be available soon on YouTube, and that's it. Thanks everyone for joining us. See you on the next one.
See you guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.